Welcome to a short journey on my mind. Once again, it's me and Dave, and we wanted to have a conversation that I think actually fits into the other two as well, because I think we've been talking a lot about how faith and psychology come together, and I think this is one of those places. I think helping people to discern their own self-talk and the voices in their head. And I know sometimes you say that out loud. I've said that out loud a couple times, and I've like, voices in my head. And when I was growing up, that was like, you're crazy if you have voices in your head. And so, but as I've gotten older and realized I actually have several voices that do self-talk with me. What do they call that in psychology? They call that self-talk? What do they?
Self-talk.
Okay. And so the question becomes, how do we discern those voices? How do we listen? Because I believe God is one of those voices, and is active. And this is one of the things that I've been learning how to actually discern over the last probably 5 years of my life. And as I get older, my mind is more settled, and I can.
Is that true, Kevin?
I don't think so, but I thought I'd say it. But yes. Yes, and I think, I've learned more about personalities. Yeah, and there are some personalities that have more voices, like committees in their minds, and some people who have just one. Like my wife is on the Enneagram scale of a 1, and she has an inner critic that is pretty loud for her. And some people have a whole committee of critics.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or
none.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think I'd like to frame this up in a little bit different way and say I can think of 4 different things here.
Okay. All right.
And so I'm going to break this down.
Yeah.
There are, and we're talking about voices in your head.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Hallucinations. We'll go back to that.
Okay.
Intrusive thoughts.
Right. Yes.
Your own thoughts.
Yes.
And God.
Okay.
Let's assume that
Perfect.
God can speak, and the voice of God can be heard or discerned.
And in the world of psychology, faith would enter into this, and they'd say, that's probably part of your faith.
Could be. Yeah.
Okay.
So here's how I would begin to tease those things out.
Great.
So a hallucination is a product of mental illness, almost always.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily. People who have schizophrenia are prone to hallucinations, but actually there's some other conditions that do experience hallucinations sometimes.
And when you say hallucination, it's different than a dream or a...
Yes. So here's it can be audible, it can be visual, it can actually be kinesthetic, it can be texture.
No kidding.
But most common are visual or audible.
Okay.
So let's just take audible.
Okay.
When it's really a hallucination, it is almost always, not always, but almost always experienced like a true voice outside of your head. Okay. As if someone were talking outside of your head. It's a heard voice. So it would be a voice that would say, Kevin, do something. Yeah. And you would be, it would feel like that. Okay. So it would be in the context of a mental illness. Okay. And it would sound like a voice speaking outside of your head that wasn't really spoken.
All right. Did you ever see the movie Beautiful Mind?
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
He functioned in this world where he had multiple hallucinations
and delusions
and they talked to him.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's what a hallucination is. A hallucination is usually a product of mental illness, and it is it's a truly heard, not truly heard, an apparently heard voice that is like a sound outside of your head, not internal to your head.
Okay, but it's truly generated from you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's your brain firing off in those little receptor areas where it's telling you you've heard something when you haven't heard it.
Right. Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's hallucination. An intrusive thought might be in the context of OCD or an anxiety disorder, some forms of depression, things like that. Okay. It's inside your head. It is a thought, but it is a pressured, repetitive thought. Okay. So it is a thought where there's pressure on it, meaning like
I got to do that.
Right. And it it tends to be repetitive.
Okay.
So it might be a thought like, you're going to run over those people, or you've got to do blank or whatever. And it's usually in the context of
self-harm.
Could be. Okay. Yeah, sometimes. And interestingly, most of the time, those intrusive thoughts don't lead to those particular, especially if they're things like, I'm going to run over that old lady, or I'm going to, things like that.
Yeah.
Little sidebar. I had a client one time who came in and he said, the first time I ever met him, he said, I am having these thoughts of running over people in the parking lot of my work. And I said, tell me about it. He says, I get in the car, I back out, people walk in front of me, and I have these thoughts, I'm going to run over them. I'm like, do you want to run over them? He goes, no. He was very like, oh my gosh, no. And I said, have you run over anyone? He said, no. And I said, well, let's start with this premise. You're the least likely person in the parking lot to run over somebody.
Yes.
Because you're distressed by it. It's an intrusive thought.
Right.
It's not a command. It's not a thing where you're going to lose control. You're worried about it.
Yeah.
And it's really driven by anxiety.
Oh.
It's an anxiety driven, that's what OCD is. That's what any kind of anxiety disorder is.
It's usually attached to some kind of anxiety.
It is an anxiety disorder.
Okay.
Right. So intrusive thoughts most of the time are driven by anxiety.
Gotcha.
Right.
That's helpful.
Then the third thing would be your own thoughts.
Yeah.
And your own thoughts could range from, like you're talking about, the inner critic. It could be your own self-talk. It could be automatic thoughts that just sort of, you have these sort of assumptions in your head and beliefs in your head and other things. They can also be your own desires. You could be like, oh, I really wish this, or I think this, or whatever. And then let's say that you could have that God could speak. So the real question, the first two things are easy to rule out, right? Those let's sort of set those aside.
So let me ask you one more question about the second category.
Yeah.
The second category of intrusive thoughts. Is intrusive thoughts, from a pastor's perspective, could this be from other principalities?
Potentially.
Okay.
Yeah, potentially. It usually,
dark things.
Potentially.
Okay.
But yeah, usually though it's in the context of an anxiety disorder where the person's brain is just going
crazy
overtime, right? Just kind of chugging along, and these thoughts are just very pressured, and they're usually almost always distressing.
Okay.
Like a person could be having distressing, intrusive thoughts. If they're racing thoughts, that could be, someone in a manic episode could have these very, those are usually very pleasurable. They're like, oh, I'm going to, build an amusement park, and I'm going to, and I'm going to do these great things. And it's like, woo, and they're just spun up here.
Yeah.
That's also a product of mental illness.
Yes.
And by the way, with creativity and that particular thing, those things overlap a lot.
Yeah.
So
that explains a lot of people I know.
Yeah. Right. So then we're in this sort of second half, which is your own thoughts and God's thoughts, and how do you discern that?
Yeah.
And here's the thing: we all have this amazing ability. Let's assume that God can speak to us, in whether whatever form that takes.
Sure.
We all have this amazing ability to lie to ourselves, to deceive ourselves, to think that so someone can be like, God just told me that I need to start this ministry, and no such thing happened.
Right.
Now, how would we know that? We don't know.
We don't know, because it happened out of,
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think the tricky part is. The other stuff is a little easier to rule out.
Right.
Or to figure out what that, they're being driven by other things.
Right.
But that kind of like, I'm not really so in touch with the fact that this is something I actually, in my own desires, want, and then I'm co-opting God for this.
We attach God to it.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
That happens a lot. I think we're all vulnerable to that.
Sure.
God wants this. God says this. God wants me to,
Well, there's also the whole idea of believing something that's just not true.
Right.
I.e., for lack of a better example at the moment, flat Earth. The Earth is flat.
Yeah.
All the evidence points to it's not. But I believe the Earth is flat.
Yeah. We have, that's an extreme example, but we all have.
I'm beginning to think it's not anymore, but yeah.
I think there's something like 10% of people or something, some way higher number than it should be.
Right.
But yeah,
I received a book in the mail on I wish I could remember the title of it, but it doesn't matter. It says the principle is that the earth is the center of creation.
Oh, yeah, right.
And that the sun revolves around the earth because God said that the sun stood still in the sky. The earth didn't stand still, the sun stood still. So everything that happens has to be literal from the Bible.
Right, right.
So the earth doesn't move. This is because science has to adopt itself to the Bible, not vice versa.
Right.
And so all I'm saying is that sometimes we just believe stuff that is
factually in error.
Right. Let's go with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I can think of other words, but let's go with that.
I think in our culture that it used to be we can operate in terms of like that's factually wrong. I think we're losing the ability as a culture to even agree on facts. And so the ability to even agree on what is objective reality, we are losing that big time. And we used to be, back in the day, we used to be like, this secular culture is eroding truth. It's happening in the church more than anywhere, where we're the ones that are
eroding truth,
eroding what are just knowable facts.
Yeah.
But I think the trickier part of what we're talking about is not a knowable fact, but more of a subjective experience. Meaning like, well, you know, totally God really told me I need to leave my wife, or God told me I need to start this ministry, and God told me I need to, you know, I need to join the staff of Journey, or what, you know, whatever it might be.
Yeah, He'll tell me if that's
Well, that's I think where this needs to go, and that is, we're all very vulnerable to deluding ourselves. And then those of us who are people of faith, it's easy to co-opt God in that.
Correct.
And go like, well, this is from God. And who are you to stand in the way of that?
Right. Once you co-opt God, there's no argument. Right.
But I would say one of the ways you distinguish between the voice of God and the voice of your own desire is that it needs to be affirmed by godly people, by other sources, there needs to be an affirmation, a confirmation of it. If it's just you in your own head saying, God's told me this, and nothing else or not much else really supports, encourages, backs that up, then I think that's your answer.
Right. And that's where sitting with someone and talking with someone about what's going on in your mind is worthy. Even if it's just a friend, sometimes it's speaking out. This is what I'm thinking. Like whatever it is, and then you can hear yourself say it, somebody else can hear you say it, and there is a degree of, oh, we just brought something really crazy into the light. And now that I hear it out loud, I have moments like in the middle of the night where I go, oh, I think this is really important, and I write it down on a piece of paper, and I've stopped doing this because every time I do it, I'm like, I'm crazy. What did I write? And what is that? But it's like,
and this is not important at all.
This is like, I know I'm supposed to take the dog out. What the?
Yeah. But you're making the point, like in certain states of mind, you're sleepy, you're hungry, you're worn down, you're emotional. We can convince ourselves all kinds of things.
Right.
And it's not about how strongly we feel it, or even how strongly we believe it.
Right.
I think when we're in a faith context in a Christian community, the only good way to discern where the boundary is between the voice of God and your own voice, which is going to be incredibly biased, is by having it consistently affirmed, confirmed
within the community,
reinforced within that community.
And the Bible helps with that as well. And
it's important, I will say, to make sure you're in a healthy faith community, not an abusive or a
cult or
cultic or whatever faith community.
Where you can actually question the ideas.
That's right, where people can push back and there can be challenge and there can be back and forth dialogue. That's also we need to say that.
And it does take humility. It takes some humility on our behalf to go, okay, I'm going to put this out there and I could be wrong. And I think that's really helpful. Thanks for joining us on this Journey Short.